little over a month ago, I think it was, when Father Long and I sat down after, I think, his first Pauline Bible study. And he was kind of laying out Holy Week. We weren't even that far into Lent, but he was laying it out. And he said, and you're going to preach Holy Thursday. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, well, of course you're going to preach Holy Thursday. You're the newest priest. And it's a celebration of the Eucharist, of priesthood, and of service. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll see it when I get there. Well, it's a lot different than I thought it would be. It's a lot different than I would have it. But here we are. This celebration of the Eucharist, of the institution of the priesthood, and of the call to serve, to love one another as Christ has loved us. And we're doing it so differently this year. But I see God working in the difference. I see God working in the change. I see God working in this time of absence and departure. Because what I see in people, in you, the parishioners of St. Joseph, is a desire for the Eucharist, is a desire for our Lord, is a desire for the sacraments that you may have never felt before. What I see in my conversations with you, mostly digital, is a deepening of your love of the gift of the church. And I can say on my end as a priest, what I've experienced is a deepening in my love of all of you. Not in a deepening of my love of you as a group, but by deepening in my love of you in the particular ways you show me God when I encounter you here. See, everything we celebrate today, the Eucharist, the priesthood, that call to serve, it's all about the ways we encounter Christ. We encounter Christ first and foremost in the Eucharist. It is the source and summit of our faith. It is Christ making himself present to every Catholic church throughout the world, body, blood, soul, and divinity on the altar, in the hands of the priest, before his people. It is the Eucharist where Christ shows his promise to never leave us. It is the Eucharist that we worship and obey, that we desire and that we need. It is the Eucharist that the church herself protects and serves. It is that Christ that we all serve and that we all desire. I know in my journey to fullness of the Catholic faith, my journey into Catholicism would have not been without my encounter with the Eucharist. It had been many, many years since I'd entered a church, and a friend invited me, and she said, come with me to Mass. Come with me to Mass. And I couldn't think up a good enough excuse, and so I went. And from my time going to Mass in the past as a child, I knew that there'd be readings, that there'd be sitting and standing and kneeling. But then it happened. The priest said those words given to us today in our reading by St. Paul. He said those words, and he lifted up that host. And I knew. And I knew that God was working. I didn't know the deep theology. I didn't know all these fancy words they teach you in seminary, transubstantiation, all this. But I knew that God was there, that he was working, that he was present. And I wanted him. I wanted the Lord more than I knew because of this Eucharist. And now today as a priest, I get to bring the Eucharist to the people of God. And I can think of no greater blessing No greater blessing than bringing Christ to his people. And I can't wait for the day until I can do it again. See, Christ in this Passover offers himself as a sacrifice, not the sacrifice of a lamb, a different kind of unblemished sacrifice, where he offers himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity for each and every one of us. And it is the priest's gift and the priest's challenge to bring that sacrament, to make it present for his people. It's the priest's gift and the priest's challenge to strive every day to live a sacramental life, a life of Christ. And I can tell you more often than not, I fail. More often than not, I'm not the Christ I wish I was. More often than not, I'm a bad symbol or sign of God's work in the world. But I thank God every day since that ordination date, May 18th, 2019, that I have gotten to serve at the altar of the Lord, that I've gotten to baptize children, to be at funerals, to witness weddings, to serve the people of God in their sickness, to hear confessions. Because in every one of those sacraments that I, as a priest, by virtue of my ordination, by virtue of the ministry of our bishop, by virtue of the ministry of our pastor, every one of these sacraments that I'm allowed and able to administer is an encounter with God. It's a call to serve. And I can tell you right now, more than ever, right in this moment in this church, my desire is to serve you. My desire is to be with you. My desire is to be the priest for you, to be a priest for the parish of St. Joseph, for the people of St. Joseph. And that can't happen in the way it should. It can't happen in the way I want. Because this parish should be overflowing because of the call that Christ has given us, the call that he has invited us to, the table that he has prepared for us. It should be overflowing right now. But it isn't. And so we have to serve differently. We have to serve in ways that we don't know, in ways that we have to learn, in ways that we don't understand. On that dreaded internet, we have to serve. Because all of us, by virtue of our baptism, are made priest, prophet, and king. And each of those callings has a different service. All of you as priests are called to sanctify the world. You're called to sanctify your workplace. You're called to sanctify your home. Not so much by the things you say, but by the great love that you do things with. That's how you sanctify the world. Because when you go through that grocery store and you're nice to that person, you're doing it because of Christ. And when you're working in the medical field and you care for the patient as if it was your own, you're doing that for Christ. And when you serve your family, your children, when you serve them with a heart of love, you're doing that for Christ and you're sanctifying the world. You're bringing us closer to that resurrection. You're living your call to serve. In your prophetic calling, when you speak the truth, even though it's difficult, when you're brave in promoting your faith, when you're not afraid to pray with those who need it, when you reach out and give those words of encouragement, that's your service. You're serving your prophetic calling, and you're living up to what Christ has called all of us to live out, to preach the good news, to teach the gospel. And finally, you're living your kingly call as Christ shows us today in this Mass, in this institution of the Eucharist. You're living your kingly call when you get on your knees and you serve, when you seek in the humblest ways to provide for others, when you make yourself lower than someone else for their sake. The best way we can serve Christ is by serving others, by washing the feet of others, by giving of others of ourselves. The best way we can serve Christ is in humility. And I tell people all the time, humility is the hardest virtue to come by, but the easiest to work towards. Because to work towards humility, to work towards the call to be a Christian service, all it takes is one act of service, one act of seeking the good of another rather than yourself. One act followed by another act and another act and another act. That's how you grow in humility. It's a daily challenge. So today we celebrate the institution of the Eucharist, the call to priesthood, and our call to serve the Lord and serve others. You're called to serve differently now. But I know that in this family of families in St. Joseph, you're answering that call in more ways than I could ever know. And I can't wait till that moment when we're back together again, when I can serve you as I should.